Hey guys, welcome back for another Monday Night Musings. Oh, once you log in, just let me know that you can see me and that you can hear me. Excellent. People are coming in and comments are there. Boom. All right. We are off and running. I did look into why the Facebook comments no longer share your name with me if you're working on Facebook. And it's because Facebook changed their privacy settings. So these third party apps cannot access your information. So if it's really important for me to know who you are, you should include your name in your comment. But otherwise, I can see everything just fine. Hey, Dave. All right. So the only reminder I have for you is that today is the last day to register for the June term at FDSA. So any of the 6-week courses, including my Mindset Skills 1, that registration ends today. And one thing that is really consistent about FDSA is that there are 0 exceptions to registration opening and closing. So today's it. I assume it goes through midnight PT, this time. Allie and Cider are eagerly anticipating this talk about anticipation. Right. So what is that? What is anticipation? We could look it up real quick. Let's look it up real quick. Let's see what the dictionary says. It's an expectation or prediction of something happening. Anticipation is the action of anticipating thing. Expectation or prediction. So that's exactly what's happening here with our dogs, right? Is that they are... I want you, little box, to go down here. Thank you. We're talking about it because us humans find this behavior to be problematic, right? This expectation or this prediction of our own behavior. Awesome, Nikki, you registered for Mindset. That's great. We're in unit 5 of 12 units. So they got those lectures yesterday, and it was a heavy load of assignments in unit 5. So they're all very busy, those gold students. So I would like you guys to tell me why this is a problem, or what part of this of the dog's ability to anticipate or predict something, when does it become a problem? So I want to know from your experience, when is this behavior a problem? Or when do you notice it becoming a problem? Yeah, Jerry, it's not always a problem, which therein lies a little bit of our problem. So Jerry, then give me an example of when you like it. When is this anticipation, this expectation or prediction of your behavior, when do we like it from our dogs? Um, Dream anticipates tunnel cues. Allie says it's becoming a problem when I don't think she's learning. I think she's just memorizing a pattern. Um, let's rephrase that, because she is learning something. She's just not learning what you are wanting her to learn. Maybe not, right? I like them anticipating until Andy patterns something too well. I can't repeat a sequence more than once or make an error the first time, as she will keep doing it. Yeah, these are. Now we're getting into it. We like when they anticipate when the dog takes the correct obstacle that you forgot to cue. We like it when it helps us. Fly ball, we like it, or is that a problem? Right? We don't want them to anticipate the tug coming out because they might drop the ball early. Is that what you mean? But we do like them to be able to predict some things, right? Because that means they can get themselves ready and prepare and react faster. See where I'm getting at? So there are going to be some dogs who tend to anticipate more quickly, just due to their genetics, because that's what they are bred to do. So if we think about a border collie herding, they really, I mean, they are reacting to the sheep and their handler, but also they have to have this sense of being able to predict what the sheep will do if they're going to have those really, really quick reactions. So I talk about border collies because I have them, you guys. It's not because I put them on this pedestal. I talk about them because I understand them at least a little bit. So they just come with these abilities to learn the pattern of cues, and they can run up that line of cues and learn to anticipate what's going to happen next. We like it in flyball when we're holding them to let go for the run. Exactly, because they've already got the whole pattern worked out, right? So we like that. And I would think that you would absolutely love anticipation of the next thing when teaching flyball, because it doesn't change. So I would think that that's a huge benefit in teaching that sport. Them being able to predict the next thing so easily. Okay. So I sort of mentioned it in the description, but we can't eliminate this because it is learning. Yeah, dogs anticipate. They will anticipate at the start line because they are predicting when you are going to release them. And so I don't think we can 100% avoid this behavior, because this behavior is learning. It's like, if you've never, I mean, we see it all the time. It's called cue transference, and you see it all the time. Every day they figure out which behaviors lead to specific other behaviors, so they just cut to the chase, right? Maybe you have a dog that started off, they were a little bit afraid of thunder, and now, when it first started, they would only start showing signs of distress when the actual thunder was happening. But now, when the air outside starts to change, and the birds know there is a storm coming, and there's a storm coming because the weatherman told you, but the dog also knows there's a storm coming because he's backed that up in his head and said, and has learned that this happens, then this happens, then the scary shit happens, and I'm distressed. That is learning. Comment says, it's good because it makes me have to be so careful in training to actually set us up for success and not get stuck doing the same sequences. And it allows me to push her when running courses. Yes, it does. So this anticipation, this ability to predict behavior, it's just learning. What we can do is we can adopt some better training practices to help combat this, because it will happen. And it's not ever going to go away, because you guys just gave me a handful of reasons and situations where we like it. So being able to tell the dog, I like this behavior in these contexts, but I don't like this behavior in these contexts, is really, really difficult, especially when one of the examples of I like it was also an agility example. So I like it when my dog anticipates my cues, CUES, when it saves my clear round. However, I don't like it when my dog anticipates my handling cues when it eliminates me. So the context is the same in the dog's head, and we like two different behaviors. So that's one thing we have to get into perspective, is that it is immediately much more difficult to pinpoint when we accept two behaviors in the same context. Running out of the ring because they anticipate the end of the round and they want to go get their reward. All of these things. It is going to happen because, and some dogs are going to test you more than others. Just in my own house, and I have zero idea if this is a thing or not, but my boys take way longer to build up a reinforcement history before they will start anticipating than my girls. All of the girls start anticipating twice as fast as the boys across all three breeds in my house. I have no idea. Personality, gender, intelligence, I don't know what it is, but that's just my experience in my own home. So what are we going to do about it? What are these best practices that we can do to help? I'm so getting a boy next time. You know, I tell most of my clients, are you sure you want a girl? I mean, boys are dumb. This is clearly a generalized statement. But my experience has been that my girls tend to learn things a tiny bit faster than the boys. Okay, so you guys can take that into consideration if you want a boy or a girl, right? But you guys also said you like it a little bit. So in the context in which we like anticipation, the girl is your better choice if that's what we're going on. Boys don't anticipate, girls do, right? If we're going off of that, which you can or not. Take it with a grain of salt. But since we can come up with situations where we like the dog to be predicting these behaviors, you might enjoy a girl dog better. Or you might enjoy a dog that anticipates more quickly. You might enjoy that challenge. That's just been my experience. My boys do not anticipate as quickly as my girls do. Okay, so how are we going to fix it? How are we going to combat this from the beginning? And I think most of our problems, what we don't like is when the dog does the thing before we cue the thing, right? They break their start line before we cue them to. They release themselves off of the contact or the table before we ask them to. They react to the handling before we've given the cues, which means we're getting further and further behind, because it is impossible to stay ahead of a dog that is anticipating your every move. You can't. Becomes impossible to guide them through a course, to control them around a course, if they are anticipating every action you do. Okay? We have a hard time with this when we're trying to attach a verbal cue to a behavior, because the dog is already doing the behavior before we have the time to say it, right? So we just have to be aware that it's always happening, and we just need to be ready for it. So the first thing that it's filed under an essential skill in my house. So if it's one of the first things my puppies will learn now, and so if you're having this problem, huge problem with anticipation, this is where I would start if you don't have this skill, is that the dog needs to realize that doing nothing is reinforceable. And I call this a standby cue. So that in the absence of other cues, standing still and offering eye contact is an acceptable behavior. So that is the first skill I think all the dogs should have. Because what I think causes a little bit of this anticipation problem is that we reinforce for action. We do a lot of shaping, which is fine. I love shaping. We do a lot of shaping. We reward for action. We want them to be going. And so they just get frantic about it, and they don't know how to stop moving. Okay? So we have to be careful that whatever we teach the dog, when we teach the dog something, and we do teach them how to throw behaviors at us, we build that up in our training. We reinforce for offering when we did not ask for something, exactly because if we use that skill of offer behavior, anticipate, do what you think I want you to do, then you also have to reinforce the opposite to try to balance things out. Okay, so that is your first step, is that the dogs should understand that standing still and offering some eye contact is an okay thing to do. And it's a great thing to do. And in the absence of information, stand still, look at mom. So if you can install that, it's at least an option in their head. But if they don't have that option, so when you're standing there and you're thinking for just a split second longer of what to do, and they're like, oh God, what do I do? If standing still and looking at you isn't in their list of behaviors that have been reinforced, it's not going to happen. They're going to start offering things. I see this stand still and bark. Well, I mean, stand still and bark wouldn't totally bother me that much. I do not get dogs that bark at me. It's so weird. I taught Shrek to bark recently, and I don't know why. But I taught Smack how to bark on cue. I had Shelties before my Border Collies, and none of them just stood and barked at me. So I don't know. Probably a little bit of I didn't get the barky ones, plus doing some of these things before I even knew they were things, right? But I mean, barking is just like, we could talk for days about barking, because barking can ooh, there can be so many functions to barking. um, Someone says the station has helped a lot with that. Huge. If your dog, if standing still, doing the standby, standing still and offering eye contact is difficult because it's new, or you're trying to install it aftermarket, right? You've got 3, 4, 5-year-old dog that you now want to teach a standby with. This station helps because it gives them a boundary. They can dance their feet on the station, they can move around a little bit on the station, but in general they are contained, so it really does help. Loopy training helps with this. Absolutely, it will help. For waiting for cues, because you're going to set everything up. So just in general, cleaning up your training is going to help all your problems. I don't mind dogs barking at me necessarily. It depends on what the function is. And if it doesn't bother you, I don't care. Go with it. If it bothers you, we can sort of talk about it. But if you don't like it, you cannot keep reinforcing it. That's the short answer. All right. So, standby. Remember, if we want our dogs to offer things, offer movement, offer behavior, we also need to teach them how to be still, to offer standing still. YouTube link today. Let me try to grab it. My computer decided to sign me out of all of my Google accounts today, and that's just so silly. That's silly, because I don't know my passwords. I don't know my password. Isn't that terrible? Anyways, I'm going to come back to this. If someone wants to... I'm trying for the YouTube link. If you, it's probably gonna, okay. I got it. Yeah, I'm still here. It's there. But in advance, if you go to YouTube and just search for my name, it came up that I was live. So that's information. Because I couldn't get into my account, but I just searched for my own page and it came up. And I do have 2 YouTube accounts. I have my Synergy Dog Sports one and my Megan Foster one. And the software that I'm using will not connect to the Synergy Dog Sports one. I'm finding that the Google accounts that are linked through my website don't work with these third-party apps, but they do work with my normal Gmail accounts. So it's a little funky. But that link should work. All right? All good again? Oh, look at that. Someone else found it too. Perfect. Okay. Another thing that can help immensely with the dogs is to... All right, Lizzie made it onto YouTube. And YouTube doesn't have the same privacy settings as Facebook, so I can see your name when you watch via YouTube. whatever. So cue discrimination is a fantastic skill for dogs to have to combat anticipation. And cue discrimination can come in a few different ways. The most basic version of that's all right, Lizzie. You're allowed to ask questions about it. Cue discrimination at the basic level for my dogs is their marker cues. So eat from my hand versus eat from the dish versus a tossed cookie on the ground versus a handful of cookies on the ground versus jump up to get the cookie versus catch the cookie I'm going to throw into your mouth. Because all of those marker cues are behaviors, right? Eating, moving forward to my hand, taking the treat out of my hand, chewing and swallowing, maybe not so much chewing, depends on your dog, but that is a behavior that is trained and put on cue. So if you're using a marker system with multiple location-specific markers, you can help your dog with anticipation because your physical cues will be the same if your mechanics are clean. Okay? Which we definitely have to talk about is that we are easier to anticipate when we are not clean and consistent with our cues. So just to keep on the page of cue discrimination, assuming I've taught a few markers and they are clean and they are on a verbal marker, a verbal word or sound or something. Simple one would be eat from my hand versus eat from the robot because you only have to control one word, right? So if my dog is in front of me, my hands are at my sides, I'm not moving, I have a cookie in one hand and the remote for the manners minder in the other. If I say yep, my dog should move forward to my hand. After I say yep, I would present the treat. If I do this at the same time, if I say yep and present the treat all at the same time, I'm much easier to anticipate. Because now the dog is looking for a twitch in my hand. This is a true story. Shrek will react to my mouth moving even if no sound comes out. What is he reacting to? He moves when my mouth opens, but he hasn't heard what I've said yet. That's like the only form of anticipation he has. Is he's just listening so hard, and if my mouth moves, he doesn't know where he should go, but he knows he should go somewhere. Okay, does that make sense? And then the same situation, cookie in my hand, manners minder robot in my hand, I'm standing still and I click the button. He could, and because he will see my finger move, technically, before he hears the sound, so he could learn that this is the cue to go eat from the machine, not the actual sound. So I could combat that by having my hands behind my back and clicking the remote because they pick up on these things. If there is something for them to anticipate, they will observe it. So we have to make sure our cues are clean and consistent. And in that cue discrimination, in those marker cue tests, if I start to see him anticipating, that is information for me that I have probably been sloppy and I'm giving him something to anticipate. Something about my physical cues is giving him something to anticipate. And then that just means I need to go back and do some sessions on my own mechanics and reinforce him for not. Did I just lose everyone? Or are you guys still here? My little watchers numbers just dropped like dramatically. All right, Lizzie's here. Lizzie's listening. It's all good. So when the dog starts to anticipate, I have to assume it's because I am giving him. Okay, good. Then it's just my software. It just went from like 30 or 40 something to 2, and it freaked me out. That maybe everyone just left. It's my imposter syndrome. It's fine. Anatomy study at the same time. Poof, you are way too ambitious. Okay. So the dog's anticipating is the cue for me to go clean up my act, because then it's information for me that I'm giving him extraneous cues that he is learning to predict. And this directly affects your start line training, because that's exactly what is happening. When we combine our release cues with other extraneous physical cues, they will learn to predict those extraneous physical cues. And that's not something we can necessarily get rid of. So what we can do is have multiple release cues. So I think we've talked about this before in the past, talking about start lines or proofing or things like that. When I lead out and I've left my dog on the start line, I could say any of his marker cues, obstacle cues, or any of the tricks that he knows, so that the only word coming out of my mouth on the start line is not just a move forward word, because then that's the behavior they predict. Well, she's going to say it eventually, so boom, let's just cut to the chase. But if the behavior I ask for on the start line that tells them to move is different every time, or different on a regular basis, you can't predict it. It's random. So I would rather be random in my release words than random in my extraneous behaviors, because we've all seen those, or maybe we've done it. I've certainly done it in the past, where I walk out and I'm doing something weird with my arm, and then I'm doing something, maybe I'm running out, which is not like me, or running backwards, or skipping, or doing a cartwheel on the way out. That's one way to keep things random so that the dog doesn't predict what you're doing. But then guess what? When you go to a trial, you're predictable again, because you don't wave your arm out as you walk out on course. You don't do a cartwheel on your way out. You don't do those weird behaviors in a trial. So you become predictable. But if we go back to randomizing the release cue, I can do that to a certain extent in a trial. If I have the ability to bring a toy into the ring, I can cue my dog a toy word instead of a move forward word. So I can bring some of that random release training into the ring. And comment says only in a match. If you're in the US, you can, there's, I think, an option to bring a toy into the ring in like every agility venue now. And so another comment says, I try and make sure that I never walk away and start her the same way at a trial. You might eventually run out of options. It's really, really difficult to change your start line routine every single run. Oh, cartwheels only in a match. Gotcha. So I would rather randomize the word I tell them rather than randomizing how I move. So this cue discrimination gives you the ability to have similar physical cues or identical physical cues and different verbal cues. And now they have to listen because your physical cues are no longer as relevant because your physical cues are the same and it's your verbal cues that are changing. So your physical cues do not predict which verbal cue. Does that make sense? It's harder for them to anticipate if your verbals are random than if your physical cues are random because your physical cues will match up to a verbal cue and then they'll be able to go back. But if you have 5 verbal cues for the same physical cue, when I'm talking about start lines, it's more difficult to anticipate. Let me know that that makes sense. Another thing that we can do in competition is on the start line, we can leave the dog in a sit, for instance, lead out, and instead of saying jump, we can say down, and then release them forward. So that even in a trial, the first word out of your mouth doesn't always have to be go forward. And then you will automatically be less predictable. Lizzie says that the stream quality really does seem to be better via YouTube. Maybe we'll just move to YouTube. Everyone can access YouTube. I'm happy to do this via YouTube. We'll see. Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about handling when they anticipate our handling cues. Wendy says Facebook started out okay and then it started buffering. So she swapped to YouTube. So that's the answer always. If Facebook is giving you problems, just go on over to YouTube. Okay. So when they anticipate in handling, I'm going to briefly go over why I think this happens. We already talked on how it's going to happen because that's learning and dogs are just trying to learn and get to reinforcement faster. They're just doing what we want them to do. But I think it happens more when we are chronically late with our timing because now the dog is faced with this decision. They can either learn to anticipate their cues so that they get some information on time, or they can not anticipate your cues and potentially hurt themselves or get a reactive name call / scream to get them to call off of an obstacle you've just sent them towards with your late information. Okay? So I think self-preservation tends to be a big motivator in these dogs learning to anticipate. And this does go back a little bit to we like them anticipating us when it saves our day, and we don't like them anticipating our cues when it causes us trouble. So that is a big job for us as humans. I'm not saying you have to be perfect every time. I'm not. But it should be our goal to try to have better and better timing every single time we step to the line. so that they can trust us to give them the information, so they don't feel this need to look for other predictors of what to do, that they can just rely on the information being a predictor enough. Then those, not only do those cues need to be on time, but those cues need to be consistent. And what I mean by that is when you have a cue, you cannot accept multiple behaviors for that same cue. Because if you start to have, if you have two specific cues for something, whether it's a physical cue, a natural cue, or a verbal cue, or just using mostly motion, if you're doing something different, cueing something different, you should be expecting a different response from the dog. And we have to keep reinforcement high for those differences, because if they start to blend together, then we get muddy water, and then the dog will start to guess, and sometimes they'll guess right, and sometimes they'll guess wrong. So timing and consistency of your cues is huge here. And then once I kind of know that's like, I'm working towards that, I understand my communication system, I'm trying really hard to be consistent, I implement what I refer to as either or training constantly. And that really does, it helps me as the handler make sure that my cues are clear enough and different enough. And sometimes in agility handling, our cues can start very similarly. Like the beginning of a false turn, the beginning of a false turn and the beginning of a lap turn look exactly the same. But the dog needs to trust that they can rely on you to provide the information on time, for them to be patient enough for me to say, oh, okay, we're continuing on the slice with the false turn, or no, I need you to come in, turn away from me, and do the wrap on the lap turn. If those two cues of mine start to get muddy, or if I reinforce the dog for giving me the wrong behavior, then I'm going to start muddying those waters more. Someone says, I feel like anticipation in learning is good and necessary, but anticipation of trained behaviors is a stimulus control problem. Well, of course it is. But I want to know, I've had this thought for a while, in agility, do we have complete stimulus control? No. I don't think we do have complete stimulus control in agility, because there's your physical cues, there's your verbal cues if you've trained them. And I would say a big majority of verbal cues aren't actually trained. And then the obstacles themselves are cues. So it's really, really difficult to have complete stimulus control in agility, which is why we are seeing these types of problems. Is they're trying, do we, or can we, or should we? Good question. Do we? I would say no. Can we? I don't know. I would love to have a roundtable discussion about it where I could see your faces. And should we? I don't know, because that means we have to get a lot better than we are. If the dog, like, right, a little bit of agility is the dog's ability to read a line and react to the obstacles. If we put it completely under the stimulus that we want, let's say if we put it completely under verbal stimulus. Do you know what that means? You have to be giving that information way quicker than you're giving it now, because I can, right? Because I'm an accident. Was accident. Agility equals stimuli control. Too many stimuli involved. Right. Isn't perfect stimulus control the ultimate but not entirely obtainable goal of dog training? Probably, because they're still living, breathing creatures that have choice. So even if we say, oh yeah, that behavior is on stimulus control, that means we can cue it to happen and cue it to not happen. But sometimes we cue it and it doesn't happen. So it's not 100%. So no, I don't think 100% of anything is ever possible, because never and always don't exist. But no, never. Lizzie says that none of us can manage perfect stimulus control in ourselves. Exactly. Never and always do not exist. Um, uh, so, so I don't think stimulus control is necessarily like something we need to be like, oh my God, I need more of it in agility, because we need the dog to observe all of the stimuli on the course, right? We teach them, hopefully, to ignore some stimuli on the course, like the judge and the ring stewards and the people outside the ring and the dogs outside the ring. We teach them to ignore some of it, but we do need them to take in the obstacles, what we're doing, what we're saying. I need them to at least acknowledge the surface and react to the surface. So there are so many contributors to how the dog is behaving on an agility course that we can't achieve this like perfect stimulus control on an agility course. That got geeky real fast. Sarah, was that you? Did you get your dog bathed? Of course it was Sarah. I mean, I don't want to put this label on Sarah, but she does this to these chats. So either or training is my current best way to sort of keep everyone in check. It's clean and she hates me. Okay, I'm glad you got her. I'm glad you got her cleaned up. That's really special, and in time for you to come have some thoughtful questions here this evening. So either or training is this idea that, one, you can set up a training session to be an either or training session where you do not do the same thing in a row twice. You do two similar things in a row twice to make sure that, one, your cues are different, and two, your dog's responses to those cues are different. But I also refer to either or training anytime my dog makes a mistake in following my handling. And I had it up here at some point. Hold on. So one thing I'll just show you my screen. So either or training is this idea that you don't do the same thing twice in a row. So here in this video, I am giving a different cue for this red jump each time and expecting a different response. The approach to the red jump is the same every time, but the exit is different, and she needs to not just do what she was reinforced for the time before. She needs to follow the handling and react to the handling. There's a tunnel over here off the screen that you couldn't see before. What? No video? That's silly. Hold on. I'll restart it for you guys. Okay, so the first time through, she goes to the tunnel. The second time through, I'm going to go to the back side of this yellow jump. And then the third time through, I bring her to the front side of the yellow jump. And so I set this up as an either or training exercise to make sure that I could cue the red jump out of the blue tunnel differently and that she would react differently because she really, really likes tunnels. So I knew this would be a really challenging discrimination for her. So I wanted to give her 3 very distinctly different cues and expect 3 different responses. So that's one way to use either or training. And then while you guys let me know if that worked, I'm going to give you guys one more video, hopefully. Perfect. Says it was working on it's not that one. I think it's this one where she made a mistake and I went into either or training. So she was supposed to come through the gap and she didn't. And that's pretty regular for her. And I should have rewarded her. So I did. So then my very next rep, right after she made the mistake, was showing her what that would look like if I wanted her to take the outside of the jump. And so I could reward her. And then we'll go try it again. So I give the cue to come in again, and she doesn't come in again. And so my next situation is to now break this down for her because she's not following the cue that I want. So I give her the reward on the line to help her her response match my cue. Okay? If I wasn't sure that I was giving the correct cue, I would go back to the drawing board and, check my handling and things like that. It does turn out she's got if I were just a few more feet away from her, she would come through the gap just fine. So we corrected that problem. Okay. So now I need to find you guys again. There you are. So how I go about it is if I'm pretty certain I gave the correct cue and the dog gave me the incorrect following of the handling, my very next repetition is to do the cue that matches what the dog just gave me, right? To confirm that I know how to create that behavior, and then also show the dog, hey, this is what it looks like if I want that, and here's the reward. And by the way, now I'm going to do something different, and I expect you to do something different. Because that's how you can ask some questions about what the dog knows and what you know about the cues. But sometimes we find out that, oh, okay, then yeah, I guess those cues are too similar. But in general, if you think you have a dog that anticipates very easily, then I would be doing either or training when you're doing your handling all of the time. I wouldn't ask for the same thing twice in a row beyond the learning phase. So always have some 2 or 3 skills that you can go back and forth between that are not complete opposites of each other necessarily, but different enough that that you are clear in the difference and that they can perceive the difference in your cue. Does that all make sense? Allie, yes, either or exercises can be utilized with verbal cues. Right. It essentially, if I don't have a physical cue associated with it, it's no different than my marker cue discrimination, right? So because I can do some of that too, if I have my, let's just say, front side of the jump versus back side of the jump, if I'm pretty certain I have that on an independent verbal cue, I can I can choose to have the same physical cue. So I can stand in the same physical location or sit in a chair and give the front side jump cue. And then I sit in the exact same spot or stand in the exact same spot, give the exact same physical cue, and give the backside verbal. Then it's just verbal cue discrimination, but either or that all of the time if you think your dog's going to anticipate your cues. So a more a heavily based verbal handling system would be more like a verbal cue discrimination exercise. Never thought of doing the thing they did wrong on the next rep to show them what the difference is. I mean, I don't know that I'm actually showing them. I'm mostly showing the handlers because a lot of times what we find is that they were right. So I cue the wrong behavior on purpose to get the handler and the dog back on the same page. I would, and just from it's technical and mindset-y, but if you can control the mistake, you can control the correct thing. So a lot of times, if you're not sure why your dog went off course, try to send them there on purpose. And then when you watch your video, you'll go, well, shit, I sent them off course, because when you did it on purpose, it looked exactly like when you did it on accident. Uh, so it really just kind of puts things, it keeps things um, in a little bit more perspective and causes a little bit less frustration. I find that, especially when training alone, if the handler just repeats it over and over and over again, and they're not getting any different response from the dog, more bad things are going to happen than if you just learn to control the mistake first and then bring it back into what you were really trying to do. Does that make sense? Cool. Do you guys have any last questions before we wrap this up? I'll give you guys just a few more seconds. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a fantastic week. Thank you for joining me. I will share where to find my YouTube for those of you um, that have an easier time with YouTube. If more questions come up, just pop them in the group and I will be happy to get to them, or other people can also weigh in. It's been a couple of people have posted some things and other members are weighing in and giving their input, and it's excellent advice and exactly what I would say. So it's really cool over there. So if you've got if you have more questions, just pop them in the group and we'll get to them. So thanks again, you guys, and I'll see you guys next week.